BYU Arizona State preview podcast. We are recording Tuesday afternoon, February 25th. Weird, because we're usually used to having a game tonight, so BYU's playing on a Wednesday this week. Podcast comes out a little later then. Chase, we've had a couple days to settle on it. We recorded our instant reaction podcast from the Arizona game. Go check it out if you didn't listen. But since then, I looked at the YouTube comments, Chase. I was getting blasted. I'm getting destroyed in these YouTube comments. People are saying this gray hat guy's an idiot, you dumb, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, first off, let's give a little behind the scenes here, what goes on here at Church Ball. I hadn't seen the baseline angle. From my angle at McHale Center and on TV, it was not a foul. That's all I had seen up to that point. And then I go back and I see that baseline angle. I'm like, okay, it makes a little more sense. This is going to piss some people off, Chase. It's still a soft call on the Richie Saunders stuff. But then my other point is, and I think I mentioned this on the podcast too, is for how soft they were calling everything that night, because Caleb Love wasn't getting fouled on those. That he had that one on Kaba Keita with like a minute left. Look, with the way they were calling it, I agree it's a foul once you see that baseline angle. But I don't like the foul being called. I don't like any of those fouls being called, is my point. And it doesn't matter. That was a few days ago. BYU won the game. Nothing you can do about it now. Controversial chance out the window. Who cares anymore? We're done. We're done with that. We're on to Arizona State, as the guy Bill Belichick once said.
Absolutely. I think, just real quick, some people were calling that like the worst call they've ever seen. Let's be real, guys. It's just because of the situation that like it was in. There's so many bad calls. But anyway, on to Arizona State, Carter. Boy, we're feeling good about the Cougs, and so are bracketologists. I mean, yes, they are sitting very pretty right now. A lot of people put them up to even an 8 seed in a lot of brackets I've seen. We used to think, just like last week, that they couldn't be an 8, 9. There's weird, wacky Sunday rule scenario things. And I'm going to be honest with you. You probably know it more than me. I have no idea what's going on. I'll just wait for Selection Sunday, and I'll just see where the Cougs are at. But right now, they look certainly 8-9 worthy. Like, they look like that good of a team. They've proven it here with the wins now. The Arizona win was so much bigger than what we thought and initially reacted to. Like, that's your best and biggest win of the season. It was quad 1A on the road. Like, it's the most impressive win by far. And so that's put them over the top. They're in the tournament. And it's just been a great week for the Cougs. You're now ranked top 25. I mean, who would have thought? A couple months ago, Carter, sitting on your couch, moping after the Utah game, your BYU Cougs would be ranked heading into the last 2 weeks of the season.
It's awesome. It's fantastic to see this turnaround. There's so many people that deserve credit. Obviously, the players deserve it more than anybody else, but this coaching staff keeping these dudes bought in. The fact that BYU's running a 10, 11-man rotation in college basketball is absurd. Successful teams, that just doesn't happen right now. We're seeing Duke do it right now. We're seeing BYU do it. Outside of that, people running pretty tight 8-man rotation most of the time, 8 to the max a lot of the time in college basketball. BYU, these dudes are bought in. They're playing hard. They have depth. And, yeah, I would have never have thought this a couple months ago. Like I said, after the Utah game, if you would have told me BYU, it's like, yeah, by the way, they beat Kansas by 34, and they win on the road from shooting free throws in the McHale Center at Arizona, I would have said, you are smoking crack right now, because what on earth is going on? But they did, and we talked about that before that stretch where we go, look, if BYU wants to go to March, they got to win one of these big dog games. You got to beat Kansas, you got to beat Arizona, or you got to beat Iowa State. They're 2 out of 3 right now, and they have a chance to go 3 for 3 in those top tier games remaining of the season. They're sitting in a great spot right now.
Incredible. It's just really funny looking back. They're the easiest part of their schedule, of conference schedule, they absolutely blew and lost so many games where you're like, what are you doing? And then this was the hardest part. This past 2-week stretch, hardest part of your schedule. And you've run the table so far, and you're sitting in just an incredible position. And now people, we're starting to talk ourselves in like, is BYU going to lose any more of these games? Save the Iowa State. Like, we'll see when it comes there. And so what a turnaround, Carter. That being said, this is a perfect letdown spot at Arizona State. All right. And if you're a regular listener, you know we like to be maybe a little pessimistic, maybe a lot pessimistic, actually. This is a big letdown spot for BYU. Look, you've been in Arizona all week. You haven't been sleeping in your own bed. You're coming off of, like I said, the biggest biggest win of the season. And so you got to be ready. What were you going to say, though?
Is being in Arizona in February for a week a bad thing right now when it's, cold weather up in Utah and you're sitting in the 75 degrees chilling by the pool? Is that necessarily a bad thing?
Oh, probably not for them. No, I think they love it, dude. I don't blame them. Although it has been nice out here in Utah, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, it's not that bad.
But you know what I mean. It's just being away from home. You're out of your groove, out of your rhithm. Did get a practice at the Suns facility, which was pretty cool. Obviously, KY's old stomping grounds. I'm sure they've had a great time. I mean, it's been a fun vacation, especially after winning that game. But now they got to play another one against an Arizona State team who I don't know what they're playing for right now other than pride and getting a big win.
No, they're playing for pride. They're playing for Bobby Hurley's, maybe I'll have a job after this season still here in Tempe. And then the players, they're playing for their next season's bag. You're playing for, okay, what NIL money am I about to get? If I close the season and I'm dropping 15, 20 a game, I just up my NIL earnings by 30% or whatnot. So that's what you're playing for. But on top of that, this Arizona State team is still dangerous. They can still beat this BYU team. The line has come out before we started recording. It's only a 3.5 point spread here. BYU coming off the high of highs of beating Kansas and winning on the road at Arizona. And then you got to come down. You got to go play at Tempe, where it's probably going to be a 50-50 split with 50% BYU fans there. But this is kind of a letdown spot. But you go back to what Arizona State has done this season in the Big-12. You lose by 5 in that overtime game against Texas Tech. I mean, they almost won in Lubbock when the season's been dusted for a 2-3 weeks now, and they still competed in that game. They barely lost to TCU. They beat Kansas State in Manhattan, Kansas. They were close with them before. They've been in these close games, and the thing is, yes, you want to take stock into what happened at the Marriott Center earlier this season on New Year's Eve, but how long ago does that Christmas break feel like? That felt like 5 months ago to me.
That was, New Year's Eve it feels like forever ago. And it's pretty rare that you wait this long to play a team again, but here we are. And so I think, Arizona State's got film. They've seen them before. They did not play good in that game. The first half was actually, if people remember, it was actually fairly close. And BYU really pulled away. Richie Saunders, I think he had like 30.
He had a 30 performance.
Burger. I just don't know how much we can take into account from that game, Karter. I think both teams have changed. And the big news, obviously, is Arizona State losing their leading scorer, right? And I don't know, what that's going to mean for BYU. He did lead Arizona State in scoring the last time they met, but that didn't keep them from beating Kansas State, like you mentioned over the weekend. So it's going to be a weird game because I think you just expect BYU to come in and dominate with the way that they did in Provo. But hey, Vegas only sees it as a 3.5 point advantage for the Cougs, and they know stuff that we don't, right? And they're really good at their jobs. And Arizona State, like you said, they're frisky. They hit some big time shots. They're actually a pretty good 3-point shooting team. They shot awful in Provo all those months ago. I think they only shot 20%, but typically they shoot just under 36% from three. And if you watch some of their games, like you mentioned, some big-time opponents where they almost pulled it out, gave some real teams like Texas Tech a scare, it's because they were hitting those like really big shots, especially late, that kept them in it. And so who knows, you get the Sun Devils going at home and they're hitting shots. BYU could find themselves in trouble pretty fast. Now, that shouldn't happen. I don't think it's going to happen. But at this point, every game this season is now just like you can overlook it because of your aspirations for the postseason. That BYU has now solidified themselves in the field of that tournament. You can always just get away from yourself a little bit, but I don't think that's the case for BYU. I think they're going to be focused. I think they're ready to go.
Yeah, and we can roll right into predictions and stuff right now, talking about this game as well. I think this gets played a little bit higher scoring. I mean, I could see a letdown spot, but to be honest, I think the way this goes is I think BYU ends up being a 4-point favorite in this game. I think we see a Vegas special here, Chase. I think this ends up on Scott Van Pelt's Bad Beats on SportsCenter, where BYU kind of has the game in hand at the end. It's a little frisky, whatever. BYU's up 7 at the very end, and Arizona State hits a garbage 3 to make it a 4-point win. All of a sudden, Arizona State covers or pushes at the very end, and Scott Van Pelt and Stanford C are talking about it on Bad Beats. That's what I think is going to happen. But in this game, I think it's going to be a decently up-tempo game, and I think we see quite a bit of free throws once again, like we saw at Arizona, and I'm just really curious to see the body language of this team coming in, because you could even feel it in warm-ups of the Kansas and Arizona games where these dudes were locked in. They didn't – one thing I've noticed with this BYU team compared to years past is there is absolutely no fear in the opponent they're playing against. I was watching Arizona's dunk line. They're doing 360 windmills through the legs, all this stuff, and BYU's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Like, we are just as – we are athletic. We are physical. It doesn't matter. Like, we're not scared of that. And I think that's been a huge reason why BYU's been able to knock off their last 2 opponents. But I'm really curious to see the body language after these 2 massive, massive wins. And I still think BYU gets it done in Tempe. I think it's not as clean, but I think they get the win. It's not one of those pretty ones. I think it's kind of a forgettable win, Chase.
I totally agree. Definitely see that happening. And I also agree with what you said before. I think BYU has a different swag about them now. They just have a different air of confidence that we didn't see at the beginning of conference play. I think something similar. I'd probably give BYU a little more points. I'm going to say, they win this game like 9 or 10. But I also do think it's just, I think you could take the over on pretty much every BYU game at this point, the way that they've been scoring the ball and also the way that they've allowed teams to score. And Arizona State's going to score much better at home, I think, than they did in their first matchup in Provo. I think BYU wins. I'm going to say they're going to win like 85 to 76. Cougs get the dub. And we're talking big things the weekend coming back to Provo.
Yeah, big things in the weekend coming back to Provo, playing against West Virginia. Chase, who's your MVP in this game?
My MVP, and I'm just going to steal this from yours, Karter. I think Yegor has a massive, massive night. I don't know. I wouldn't say he hasn't had the best games because he's made such a big impact. He hasn't had the prettiest box score games. I think he took the more assisting and facilitating role in these bigger opponents, but I think he's going to see an inferior opponent and maybe have a little hunger in his eyes and look to have a big scoring night and then continue to do Yegor things. So expect a pretty big night from Yegor scoring. And then, of course, always getting his assists and being that facilitator as well.
You know what we haven't had in a while, Chase?
Yegor triple-double watch?
Oh, Yegor triple-double watch. I actually like that. I like the Yegor MVP pick, too, because also, if you remember last game with the Richie 30 burger, Bobby Hurley's not going to forget that. This team's going to – the scouting report, number 1 on the scouting report, is going to be Richie Saunders. He's going to get hounded all game, and I think that might open up things for Yegor Demet a little bit more. I also think it opens things up. I've called this before. It's a risky play. It's like – when you're trying to pick a little, you're like, okay, who's going to score a first touchdown in this game or whatever? And you're like, I'm going with the tight end, who knows? I think Trevin Knell, we're due for a nice little Trevin Knell 5
Is that 2 games in a row? A Trevin Knell pick?
Did I say him for Arizona?
You did.
Are you positive? I'm pretty sure I said Yegor.
I
think I said Trevin Knell.
Wrong. You said Trevin Knell one of the last 2.
I thought I said it. I thought I said it the game before Kansas, but yeah, let's go with Trevin Knell here because I think the scouting report's going to be locked in on guys like Richie and obviously Yegor, and he's been due for one of these games where he just explodes in the first half for 3-4 threes.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think a lot of guys. It's funny with how well they've been playing. It's just been so balanced that you see okay, a lot of these guys are due, except maybe Richie, but he's not due. He just keeps doing what he's doing at an amazing rate. So I think it's a good point. And Trevin's been back in his groove for sure, and he's been a big reason that they've been on this tear and won these big games recently. So, yeah, I like that pick. I like that pick a lot.
I'm going to go score prediction 79-75 BYU in this one. I think the score lies a little bit. I think BYU has this one kind of comfortable, and then Arizona State hits some garbage shots at the end, makes it look closer than it is. BYU wins this game 79-75. And all right, let's go to a quick break and we'll talk some more about BYU hoops right after this. Chase, looking at the Big 12 standings right now, BYU is sitting at 5th right now. The craziest thing about this is BYU right now, they're 10-6. Iowa State's right above them at 11-5. Kansas right behind them at 10-7. BYU currently controls their destiny on whether they can get a double bye in the tournament. If BYU wins out, they're going to be sitting at the 4, potentially if Texas Tech or Arizona fell apart, the 3 or 2 seed even. That's still in play here for BYU technically. It's not going to happen, just FYI. But if BYU does win out, they are guaranteed a double bye in the Big 12 tournament. We've talked about this a little bit. If you're getting a double bye, man, you're a real player to win this thing.
Double bye means you only have to win 2 games until you are in the championship. And then I feel like at that point, it's anyone's game. Off. Yeah. So, yeah, it would be incredible for BYU to get that. Also, just for the rest, I think that you get, I think for the pressure just taken off your back of not having to play an extra game against someone that frisky and maybe you'd be favored against.
Your resume.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, potentially a resume damager. It would be amazing. And also would be just a great accomplishment for BYU basketball to, in the first year of Kevin Young and from where they were at to start conference play, fight all the way back to get a top 4 seed in the conference tournament in the second best basketball conference in America. And before anyone freaks out, they are the second best this season. Go watch SEC basketball. It would be a huge accomplishment, more than like I think anything, because at this point, the Big 12 tournament, I think, would be really cool. We'll see what they can do, but it's not going to, define or change anything about the postseason and March Madness. But with that being said, though, they do control their destiny, right? They have to take care of these opponents who they're going to be favored against and should be beating. And then you got to go to Iowa State, man. And then look, from what we saw from this Arizona game, if we know anything, it's BYU's not afraid. Go into anyone's house and beat them, even if they're not favored, even if they've heard the noise, even if they've lost to them before, blah, blah, blah. BYU will have a legit chance to go beat Iowa State, who's injured and struggling, right, to get that 4 spot. And if anything, it'll be a huge confidence booster for the Cougs. And then I really think, and this is probably me being pessimistic again, I'm not like expecting much from the Big 12 tournament from BYU. Like if you win a game, like sweet, win 2, okay, even better. That's really cool. If they get this double bye, though, you really start to be like, okay, can BYU win the Big 12 this season? Can they keep up this momentum, this confidence, and this incredible offensive streak that they have got going on? Could they actually pull it off? I don't think I'm ready to think that way. Unless they were to get a double bye, I'd have to take a serious look at who they were going to get and if that's a real possibility, Karter.
Yeah, I asked this question after the Kansas game. I'm curious to see your answer now after it stewed a little bit. But if you're a BYU fan, would you rather have a Sweet 16 run or a Big 12 title, tournament title?
Yeah, I think we both said Big 12 title.
Have you changed your answer?
That's so tough, dude. It's still so hard. Because like I said before, like a Sweet 16 run's just more fun in the moment. And a Big 12 title is really cool, but also doesn't mean a whole lot. Like in football, Big 12 title is massive, and then it gets you into the playoff or whatever. It just conference tournaments in basketball, across basketball, lose their spice for fans. I'm sure the players still think it's a big accomplishment, and it is. So, but it's a banner, dude. You get to win the Big 12. That's so hard, dude. I don't know. I'll say Big 12 tournament title. I'll say that this season. Yeah.
I still think it's so tough. I think it's the exact weight of what it is, because I think in the moment, I think a Sweet 16 run is cooler, but I think long term, okay, having a trophy, having that banner in the building, is better. But man, having that Sweet 16 run, like let's say you knock off a team like you knocked off an Alabama or a Florida in the second round. All of a sudden, you're sitting there in the Sweet 16. People are going to remember a big upset game like that, and especially if a guy like Richie Saunders became a March Madness character, like which I think he can be. I don't know.
In the moment, it would be infinitely more fun than a Big 12 tournament run. But it's the aftermath of it. No one remembers the Sweet 16 teams unless you were like a 15 or 16 seed. But people people will be able to remember and point back to a Big 12 title, big trophy, big banner. And it's just, dude, I don't know. That's literally like the toughest question, because holds the same weight, like you said.
Yeah, we'll put out that clip from the
Yeah.
Kansas game right after this. But anyhow, the other thing I wanted to touch on too is Lenardi's bracketology right now. We talked about it a little bit. They have BYU in an 8-9 game against Utah State. Some of them, like the Field of 68, they have BYU playing UConn in the 8-9 game. And we've talked about it many times how you want to avoid that 8-9 game, so you avoid playing Florida, Alabama. I don't think they're going to have to worry about playing Duke or Auburn, which is a great thing because those are the top 2 teams in the country, far and away, in my opinion. But to be honest, we put out that tweet of, okay, it's BYU versus UConn according to the Field of 68. How do you feel about that? To be honest, Chase, how I feel about that is I'm not that scared of UConn. I think people who are scared of UConn just hear the name Dan Hurley, back-to-back national title winners, which is fair. But if you've watched this UConn team, they are light years away from what those teams were. And to be honest, I mean, there's no NBA guys on this roster. This roster is not anywhere near what those teams were. I understand Danny Hurley's a great coach, but I'm not that scared playing against UConn in the tournament, to be honest, this year.
No, I
want to say, people are going to say, oh, you're going to regret saying that. And okay, maybe I will, but to be honest, they're just not that good of a team this year. Go watch them play, I promise.
Yeah, we're talking about a team that lost to Colorado, the literal worst team in the Big 12. Granted, it was months and months ago, but that's the same roster.
They lost to Seton Hall.
Those are the same exact dudes, right? Yeah, so I think with BYU and just their history, I don't know if I'd be comfortable with anyone in the first round, but there's people I'd feel better about. And UConn's one of them, just because of the way that they play. The Dan Hurley stuff has spoiled for a lot of people, right? This whole I'm just going to be mean and yell at everyone approach. It's funny how quickly people turn on you when you're not winning anymore, and then start to realize that might not be the way. But that's besides the point. But this UConn team is beatable, insanely so, and we've seen that throughout the season. So yeah, I wouldn't at all be like there's no chance, but I'd always be nervous in the first round, especially in March Madness. Would you rather, because I think Lenardi has him Utah State, if you're a BYU fan, would you rather be playing Utah State or UConn in the first round?
I'd rather play UConn. I think I'd rather play UConn.
Right.
And people are going to say that's absurd. I think Utah State's a solid team. Now, you look at who Utah State has played this year. Arguably, their best opponent has been New Mexico, UC San Diego, who they lost to.
New Mexico. They lost to New Mexico twice. They haven't beaten New Mexico all season.
That's what I'm saying. So it's kind of it's close. To be honest, those aren't the teams that scare me in the first round. I think what would be scary is, okay, the rivalry aspect of it, because that's the ultimate trump card for at least a few years now is, hey, beat you in the NCAA tournament. I mean, you talk about the Duke-Carolina rivalry. Duke fans are never going to let down that Caleb Love shot in the 22 Final Four. Same thing would happen in this Utah State game.
Yeah, and I think Utah State would be like just so dang hungry to do that to BYU.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I think that's a good question. There's these other teams on the 8-9, 7-10 line. Like, dude, I don't want to play Louisville. I want nothing to do with that Louisville team. Obviously, BYU can't play Baylor, but, you're playing the Mountain West. Are you okay playing against the Mountain West, Chase?
Yeah, I think you feel pretty good. I mean, that's a good draw. No disrespect to the Mountain West, but, like, it's better than what you're saying. Yeah, Louisville or some of these teams who have just played better opponents and proven themselves. I think Jerry Palm has BYU as a 10 seed playing UCLA in the first round. I think I'd like that as a BYU fan. You get a little revenge action from a few years ago. Now you're the underdog heading into this game. I also like the way they match up with UCLA, right, in that 7-10 spot. But yeah, I think you said this before. We were looking at the bracket. Like, the brackets now are just a good indicator of who's in and who isn't. But the matchups, dude, are really nothing to look at because it's going to be completely different come Selection Sunday, and we're going to be completely wrong and misguided by a lot of these bracketologists. And it's not saying that they're bad. It's just like incredibly difficult to figure out. And also, who knows what Sunday rules come into play for BYU, because again, like we heard a couple like last week that BYU couldn't possibly be on 8-9. Now we're seeing them on that line, and it happened last year. We were all taken by surprise at the 6th seed, and then it wasn't explained until after that the Sunday thing was the reasoning. So, that being said, like it is fun to talk about these opponents, and so if you're BYU, man, and you said this before, so I'm kind of stealing your thunder, but aside from the 1 seeds at this point, from what I've seen from BYU and the team that they are right now, they have a legitimate chance, I believe, to beat anyone. And I really do think that about the 1 seeds as well. It just would be so hard to see them going up against Duke and then feel any sort of confidence. But anyone else, Carter, I'd be like, I actually think BYU could pull this off. I actually like their chances in this one.
Yeah, it's not this impossible feat. It's not you're a 15, 20-point underdog against these guys. BYU, Alabama play on a neutral court. Sure, Alabama's favored by, 10, 11 points or so, but we just saw BYU win outright as an 8-point dog on the road in a hostile environment against a top 20 team. So it's not this absurd statement to say BYU can beat a 2 seed in March Madness or, Florida and Alabama. Do I think BYU would win those games? No, but it's not impossible. Now, Duke, Auburn, that might be a different story.
Yeah, again, not impossible, but holy cow. I mean, it just would be at a really tough matchup for the Cougs.
Yeah,
those guys.
I cannot wait. Selection Sunday so close. We're like 2.5 weeks away. That's a crazy statement. That's crazy. We're only 2.5 weeks away from Selection Sunday, the most underrated sporting event of the year. Chase, other news and notes around the Big-12 right now. Craig Smith is getting fired or got fired this week at Utah right now. And I have some thoughts about this. Utah, 15-12 this season. They beat Kansas. They swept the Kansas teams in the Huntsman Center. They have a 7-9 Big-12 record. To be honest, I kind of feel bad for Craig Smith, man. I think he got a raw deal at Utah where he wasn't given really any real NIL investment. And then on top of that, they were supposed to be the doormat of the Big 12 this year. They've come in, they've been a respectable team going 7-9. They're close to a 500 record in the second toughest conference in college basketball. To be honest, I think this Utah team has definitely overachieved this season. But this comes back to the whole thing of college basketball right now of, okay, do the donors believe in you? And are they going to put up absurd amounts of money for what you're bringing to the table? And we saw what Kevin Young has done at BYU, and they say, oh, you bring in this NBA kind of guy, and all right, we're going to start dumping a lot of money into recruiting and everything into this program. And I think they saw what was going down the road in Provo and said, we need to do that if we want to be able to compete at the top of this league. And now it seems like Alex Jensen is their guy in Utah, and he's going to come in, and they're going to try and replicate what BYU has done, putting together an NBA-style staff and bringing in recruiting. And then all of a sudden, if you're a Utah donor, you're going, hey, they got an NBA guy in there. All right, I'll put up a couple more $1 million or whatever towards basketball. And so they can start getting this investment money. My point is, I think Smith got a raw deal because obviously he wasn't getting the same level of investment. And I think the AD at Utah and the board of trustees or whatever definitely thought, hey, we're not going to be able to compete in NIL unless we make a big splash higher. I just think the timing of it was very weird too.
Timing was weird, and also doesn't make a lot of sense. I think it's a little unfair to the players who committed to this guy, right? Who are, like you said, as far as their expectations went, having a decent season. Like you said, being 7-9, they have a chance to go about 500. They did beat BYU, right? BYU's fostering a very good team again, right? So you have all these things that you can point to as successes, and yet they didn't even let them finish the season. And we're just going to get rid of you now. Makes me think maybe they're really desperate to grab a guy quickly and make promises or whatever right now. And like you said, it's probably Alex Jensen. I don't know the logistics behind it, but the timing is weird. If you're Utah basketball right now, you're not even on life support. You're just dead. There's no excitement for Utah basketball. And that's just kind of how it is. Utah's a football school. And then your basketball team's just been miserable for years. And so I think if you're Utah, you're just trying to kickstart and jumpstart a dead program right now. And I just think they looked at it and it's like, it's not going to happen with Craig Smith. It's just, we can't just keep going on being boring. We're going to have to try our best to switch everything up and make a big splash and try and kickstart it. But if you're Utah, you hope you make the right hire and get the money and support. The problem is, I just don't think they have the well that most Power 5 or 6 teams in college basketball do, because again, they just haven't. They're not exactly a storied program. They haven't had success, and so people aren't going to be super psyched, no matter who you hire, to be putting up insane numbers like we've been seeing in college basketball for these elite athletes and incredible recruits. But the real key to college basketball, make one big run. All of a sudden, everyone's excited again. Everyone's invested. Everyone's bought in. BYU tickets this weekend are $70, and they're not even.
They were like $20 a week ago.
It's not even a massive game, but as soon as you start to win, you get ranked, right? You have these massive games that you get to point to and think about and watch back for a while. That's what gets people excited. That's what gets people spending money, giving you money, donating. So if you're Utah, that's what you're going for. I don't understand why it had to happen 2 weeks before the regular season ended, but they must have felt like it needed to happen ASAP, apparently.
Yeah, and on top of that, the BYU-Utah game at the end of the season, $150 after fees right now, which is crazy.
That is crazy. That's a big game. I think just people are just ready for revenge. That's gonna be a big game. There's gonna be some big football recruits there as well. I've been hearing some rumblings about. So
potentially
gonna be a big night for guys like senior night. Trevin Nell. See if he can back up.
Freshman night for Yegor Demon.
Freshman night for Yegor. Yeah, I mean, people want to see, I think, BYU just lay the wood. And if you're Utah, you want to get up for that game, but your head coach just got fired.
Or is it the opposite of what we see in football, where it's the interim coach game and they're playing for nothing? And that's going to be a fun one at the Marriott Center that day. I want to ask you this, Chase. What's a better job, Utah State or Utah?
It's a tough question. If you just love basketball, Utah State's the better job. And I'm not trying to be a hater of Utah, even though deep down I am. But Utah State's just a better program. They have better hoops. They have better support. The Spectrum's a great place to play. Students show up in droves. It's clearly a better basketball program. But they'll never be able to pay as much as Utah can, right? And have the opponents Utah does. And so it just depends on what you value as a head coach. If you're I just want to be making money, support my family, right? Build generational wealth, maybe have the potential of doing something really special at a massive program like Utah. But if you just I just love hoops and it's a better program, it's Utah State. So
I think Utah State's the better job. We've seen guys like Ryan Odom and Cal, we've seen these dudes have a lot of success in Logan and then use it as a stepping stool to a much bigger job. But the consistent thing is coach after coach after coach with Danny Sprinkle. Doesn't matter who it is. Utah State's still putting out a great roster, and they're still going dancing without having to win the Mountain West tournament every single year. On top of that, like you said, the Spectrum Center, great place to play. The fans show out every single game. It's a great environment up there in Logan. And on top of that, you're not having to compete with Big-12 money like Kansas, BYU, Baylor, Arizona, Houston. You're competing with other Mountain West schools, so the playing field's a little more leveled. And on top of that, you have that great fan support behind it. I actually think I'd rather take the Utah State job, to be honest.
Yeah, again, it's just what you value. You just if you're Craig Smith, who literally hopped from Utah State to Utah, you got more money, right? You got paid a whole lot more. So if that's what's more important to you, not that that's super shallow, whatever, then you take the Utah job or you take any other power. I mean, like you said, all these guys you mentioned who are great coaches, they left for big programs to go and do something special. If you're Utah State, what you're saying is all true, but you're also running the problem. You'll never land a 5-star recruit. You'll never get huge guys. You'll probably never have that just potential to go and do something crazy in the tournament. 1 or 2 games is probably, 1 or 2 wins is probably your ceiling. That's probably the best you will ever get. Mountain West title is the peak. Whereas if you're Utah, you at least have the potential being in the Big-12, having the money that you do to perhaps be something more. Now, right now, that looks like a very far away. But there's options on both sides. Yeah, I think it depends what you value.
Yeah, I think so. Anyhow, any other news and notes we want to touch on?
No news and notes, but boy, I'm getting the itch. It's almost
Yeah.
March, Carter. It is that time.
It is
Conference
that time.
tournaments start next week.
And then
Holy cow.
We're going to have, and then soon after that, it's going to be portal season, which portal season kind of sucks, and you have to deal with recruiting and all that. Anyhow, but another point I wanted to make. I thought about this the other day. I think I told you before maybe I didn't tell you before we start. Anyhow, it doesn't matter. One thing I thought about was with Kevin Young and their recruiting pitch going forward. I think the most underrated part about Kevin Young's recruiting pitch going forward is going to be not that he coached with Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, or it's going to be, we have AJ DeBanza coming in, or it's the money that BYU will give you. I think the one thing Kevin Young's going to start pointing to for a lot of these guys is what he's done with number 15, Richie Saunders, man. Yep. The development from last year to this season, it's just a different player, and you can say, hey, look what we've turned this guy into, who's getting real NBA looks now. And I think this is going to be his best recruiting tool going forward, to be honest.
Absolutely. Just the fact that he's turned BYU into an NBA destination. And the beautiful part of it is, you have guys like Yegor Cannon who are already getting NBA looks before they even showed up. But the beautiful part is Richie Saunders, who came to BYU with probably a less than 1% chance that he would ever go to the NBA, right? And that's no offense to him. It's just what happens when you go to BYU. It happens when you're from a Utah school. It's just how it works. And now he's turned him into someone who's getting legitimate looks. Scouts are watching. He's going to get workouts with teams at the very least. Richie's future is, still who knows exactly what he does, but he's turned him into a legit guy. And that is it's beautiful to see that he's done it with someone that he didn't have to recruit and pay millions of dollars, but someone who stuck around at BYU for years and years, played all the roles, right? Coming off of the bench, being just the dirty worker guy to now being leading scorer, really the first offensive option, and doing all that he does is really special. And you're right. It's just an incredible recruiting pitch, because I think you just can have both now, right? You have your pitch to the 5 stars like AJ DeBonsta and Xavier Staten, and right, who you can say, look what I've done here. Who's what I've played with, all these connections. Then you have the pitch to, just as important in college basketball, the 3 stars, the guys who don't get a lot of the love from rivals and 24/7 sports, whatever, who make a real impact on your team and who want to develop into those top tier guys and who aren't yet, and give them that pitch, because they're just as valuable in today's college basketball.
Absolutely. I thought about that and I go, you know what?
That's a great point.
Anyhow. Quickly around the Big 12, and then we'll get out of here. Houston clinches the regular season title, at least a bare minimum of a share of it, but they're going to clinch the early. I mean, they still have 3 games left, and they clinch this thing. Houston is 16-1 in the Big 12, back-to-back regular season titles for Kelvin Sampson.
First 2 years in the Big 12.
I know. Credit to them. Shout out to those guys, just taking down the Big 12. I mean, Bill Self and Kansas City every year, the Big 12 tournament, the reason why there's not much history and, about it compared to the Big East or the ACC tournament is because it was the Kansas Jayhawk Invitational every year, it seemed like, throughout the 2000s and 2010s. And now it's actually, hey, it's Houston, Iowa State now. Welcome to the party.
Yeah, it's changed drastically, especially with Kansas's fall off and everything, and the departure of Texas and Oklahoma. But I'm not just saying this. The Big 12's in a better spot now, I think, with adding Houston and BYU and some of these other Pac-12 teams, Arizona in here now. It's pretty great.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you got Kansas right now. They get their big win, their big revenge win over Oklahoma State on Saturday. They seem pretty pissed off at Allen Fieldhouse on Saturday against Oklahoma State. We got a bubble team. All of a sudden, BYU has jumped from the bubble. They're a lock for the tournament now. And now Baylor and West Virginia are now flirting with, hey, Baylor loses to Colorado and Boulder this week. Baylor and West Virginia, they're saying, hey, guys, we're okay. We're on the bubble now. We're kind of freaking out a little bit.
Yeah, it's kind of scary hours if you're both those teams, really. Tonight, that TCU West Virginia game, if Mountaineers don't take care of business, it's in West Virginia and Morgantown. I think if they lose, Carter, they find themselves on the wrong side of the bubble, and which is crazy because they were like at one
Stone cold
point
lock.
looking 6th seed, right, and a stone cold lock. But a lot has happened to them, unfortunately, a lot of injuries and stuff. But yeah, and Baylor, I mean, holy cow, who would have thought?
I know. Baylor, they have so much talent on that roster. And I wonder if Scott Drew sits there and thinks, maybe I should have taken the Kentucky job. Maybe I should have gone to Lexington after the season. Or maybe he's looking at Bloomington real estate, Chase. Maybe he's on Zillow right now being like, you know what, is Bloomington, Indiana that bad of a place? You know, great fan base.
Is it that bad of a place?
You know, maybe I leave Baylor. You know, maybe I go to Indiana and get all this money.
If he wasn't going to leave for the Kentucky job, I don't think he's going to leave for Indiana.
I don't know what his buyout is anyways. His buyout's probably crazy after that extension he signed and everything too. Another last thing too, Kansas State, it's hilarious. Kansas State was all of a sudden, teetering on the bubble with BYU, and now Kansas State. I think we even predicted this on the show. It's after that BYU loss, we're like, look, Kansas State doesn't have games the rest of the season they're getting up for, so they're probably going to lose those games. They just play to their competition. They're the Grim Reaper of the Big 12 Conference, where it's like, hey, we're going to lose to every bad team, but we're going to beat every great team in this conference.
That's exactly what they've done. Yeah, man. Do you think Tang's job is safe anymore? I mean, was that run enough to do it?
No, I don't think so. I think anything's on the table at this point.
Yeah, I think you're probably right because they're still. It was a massive disappointment this season. It was for Kansas State.
Yeah, I'm curious to see the coaching carousel in the Big 12 Conference. What potentially happens at UCF with Johnny Dawkins, Cincinnati with Wes Miller? Do they look elsewhere? Kansas State with Jerome Tang, like you said. There's going to be a lot of moving parts potentially, but luckily, I guess BYU has their guy going forward, and they don't have to worry about that, which is a huge sigh of relief because there's going to be a lot of coaching openings this year in college basketball. But anyhow, that does it from us. Long preview today. We really didn't preview that much, to be honest, Chase.
Not much to it. Just I think if BYU keeps playing like they're playing, they should win, or they can lose.
Simple as that. And also, BYU goes and whoops Cincinnati. They lose to Cincinnati the next time they play on the road. Hopefully that's not the same thing that happens again with the Arizona State stuff, but I think that's kind of a lesson learned from Kevin Young and BYU. I think maybe they underestimated Cincinnati going into that game on the road, and I think they realized, hey, just because we beat these guys by 20 points, he even mentioned this in the presser after Arizona, just because we whooped these guys last time doesn't mean we are all of a sudden just going to whoop them again. We had a great shooting night that night. If we don't have a great shooting night, you got to play hard. You can't let down. Anybody can win in this conference. So whether it's Colorado, Arizona State, anybody can win. So that does it from us at Chase_Roger0, at Karter BA, at ChurchBallPod on everything. Make sure to follow. Get that Twitter follower count up to over 1,000 followers ASAP before March Madness rolls around. We will be here all tournament season long. Chase, we will be doing a live reaction to Selection Sunday. We'll be doing Big 12 live reactions, and we will also be live after this Arizona State BYU game, so stay tuned in for that. Follow us at ChurchBallPod on everything to be on the live show for that, and come chat with us after the game in Tempe this week.